Hi, everyone. This is the acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. These are your sun and rising sign horoscopes for the month of April 2020. And in this video, I'm taking a look at the air signs, Libra, Aquarius, and Gemini. So I know that there's a lot going on this month. Some people are going to be reading a horoscope while on the front lines of an industry that is not shut away right now, where there's a lot of risk. A lot of other people are going to be at home in a place where there doesn't seem to be a lot going on. I found this horoscopes this month maybe the most difficult to write of any that I've ever done. So please forgive me if they're not that great. But I also would love your feedback and love to hear how each of these transits affects you, because it's not only is it a surreal moment, but it's a very interesting moment to reflect on astrology and how each of us are experiencing it very differently, considering that some of us are very much out there right now, and a lot of people in a lot of places in the world are very much confined. So, with that being said, let's dive in. We're going to start with Libra first, our cardinal air sign, and we'll dive in. Now, the beginning of the month, there's a bunch of transits in the first week of the month. The first transit that is of great importance is the conjunction of Mercury and Neptune in your sixth house. Now, you want to be really aware of the potential for, um, uh, you know, first of all, Mercury Neptune can be boundary dissolving. And so, just being discerning, being grounded mentally and emotionally, it's really important, because you can get sucked into conflict with Mercury and Neptune in the sixth house, exhausted, depleted, or drained by being too porous or too open. So you want to be careful of that. On the other hand, Mercury Neptune in the sixth is imaginative, mystical, spiritual, quite compassionate, and maybe giving you a change of heart or a change of mind that's much needed, or giving you the fuel to serve compassionately right now. But you may notice that the mental, emotional, watery quality of Mercury Neptune is very pronounced in the first week of the month. Now, in the first week of the month, the other thing that's happening is Saturn and Mars are just coming through a square in your or a conjunction in your fifth house. Now, that's the place of children. So Mars, Saturn in the fifth house, maybe a little bit of struggles or difficulty. If you have kids, they might be going a little stir crazy. This could also be about just the worry right now about your children would be pretty normal. It could also be the case that kids might be acting up a little bit. On the other hand, this could be, if you're pregnant, this is definitely that situation where there's maybe a little bit more fear or anxiety around a pregnancy, because Mars and Saturn are a little intense, right? Confining Saturn and action-oriented Mars, like an unstoppable, immovable object meets an unstoppable force. So that push-pull between the brakes and the gas around children and pregnancy is really strong this month. The other thing to watch for, of course, the fifth house has a lot to do with pleasure and creativity. It's a great time to work on something that requires a lot of effort, discipline, and focus. You may also be feeling a little bit stifled, or like you're having a hard time, just experiencing joy or happiness. And, not a bad idea to be lighthearted if you can this month. Saturn and Mars in the fifth may make you feel like you should just be really serious. And, maybe that's productive in some ways. In other ways, it could stifle you and kind of steal your joy this month. So be a little bit careful about that. Now, the 1st to the 15th, there is in general a major transit happening in your house of home and family, and that's the conjunction of Jupiter and Pluto in the 4th house. This is a deep theme of death and rebirth. It could be generational. It could be something happening around property or home or parents, but it's a deep theme of death and rebirth around home and family. So watch that for the first 15 days of the month. You're also going to see Mars squaring Uranus from the 5th to the 8th house. Well, this energy is also about wanting to break free of obligations that you might have to other people and craving independence. But you also do have to be careful, because this energy could be a little bit reckless or defiant and get you into trouble as a result of being sort of reckless, or not listening to your better self. There's a push-pull all month long between the conservative tendency and duty, obligation, maturity, even isolation, and then Uranus, which wants to break confine. That energy is going to get really intense throughout the month. So you can watch for that in a general psychological sense. Now, on April 7th, the full moon is also going to come through in Libra. And that is going to fall in your home sign and first house. But while it's placing an emphasis on the need for self-care, self-love, independence, it's the arrows pointing at you. Interestingly, opposing the exalted sun in the seventh house of relationships. So don't be surprised if there's a bit of a push-pull between the need to focus on self and things that are happening that are creating a little friction or tension in relationships right around the full moon. Now, if we go forward from the 13th to the 15th, the tension steps up a little bit in the area of relationships as the sun in your seventh house of marriage and relationships starts going through squares to Pluto and Jupiter in the fourth house of home and family. Um, there is some powerful motor happening here around home, family, property, and relationships, or family karma and relationships. That starts to step up right around the middle of the month, like the 13th to the 15th. Then there's two sequences of transits that happen from about the 19th through the 30th. And I'm just going to show them to you all at once and give you an overview of what I think it means, because it's too many to, it's like it'd be splitting hairs. Might as well just group them together since they're all basically doing the same thing. So the first thing that happens is the sun goes through squares to Jupiter and Pluto, and then goes into Taurus in your eighth house and hits a square to Saturn in your fifth. Now you can see that taking place as the month goes on. You'll see there's the sun then entering Taurus in the eighth, squaring Saturn. Then the sun is going to get into a conjunction with Uranus in the eighth house right as the new moon in Taurus comes around, and that happens on the 22nd. So on the 22nd, then you get a new moon in your eighth house with Uranus, and don't forget the square that that new moon has to Saturn in your fifth house. As if that's not enough, then Mercury repeats the exact same dynamic. Between, say, the 24th and the 30th, Mercury is going to work through squares to Pluto, then Jupiter, then Saturn, switching from squares to the fourth into the fifth as Mercury moves into the eighth in Taurus. As Mercury moves into the eighth in Taurus, you're going to see it also by the very end of the month getting into a conjunction, first a square with Saturn and then a conjunction with Uranus. So overall, the lineup is Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn receiving squares from the sun and Mercury, and then a new moon. That happening all between the 19th and the 30th of the month. What is that? So what does that all mean collectively? Well, there's a trade-off of tension between relationships and home and family that really intensify toward the end of the month, starting really in the middle of the month. But it keeps growing more and more intense, and it repeats a couple of times. There's a couple of waves. Then you've got eighth house, fifth house tension, which breaks down to things like debts or obligations to other people, money, financial issues or hardships or complications. The eighth house is also going to focus on the topic of death, mortality, fear, anxiety about the future. So money, some money stuff, money and relationship stuff, maybe issues around fear or anxiety. And then what is it relating to? It's all coming back to the fifth house, which has to do with pleasure and fun, sexuality, children. It's a joyful house. So the tension is really unique. And I always think of fifth house, eighth house squares of having to do with both the karmic debts and obligations that we have to other people, and how they oftentimes they try to steal our joy. Or you could say also the responsibilities and obligations to other people that we have, and what a joyful thing it can be to tend and care for those people that need us. Those are two things that can come through. The other thing would be, in general, this can be a time where you feel like you're being liberated from some kind of debt around family and relationships. But it is, while you're being liberated, there's also a heaviness around it that temporarily puts you into a more gloomy state where it's just harder to find your joy. But trust the process, because it appears that you are on the edge of a breakthrough. Eighth house breakthroughs often involve heaviness, but with Uranus there, this is there to free you or liberate you. So that's the way that I would put it all together. All right, let's wind this back up and do it again. And now let's do it for Aquarius. So we're going to put Aquarius on the ascendant now and start over from the beginning of the month, where we see Mercury conjoining with Neptune in your second house of finances and money. So immediately you're thinking about the role of finances and money in your life. And, Mercury Neptune can be about feeling overwhelmed or depleted or afraid or anxious or overthinking things, or kind of, just mental turmoil, let's say, and unrealistic or extreme, irrational thinking about money and finances. This can also be about a depletion or drainage of money or finances. It can also be the potential for some degree of deception, illusion, or delusion around money and money and resources in general. So you do want to just watch for that. Now, as we go on, the other thing that's happening at the very beginning of the month as an Aquarius rising is Saturn and Mars are getting together in your first house. Now, Saturn and Mars in your first house can give you a feeling of resilience. If you're working somewhere and you are in the thick of the coronavirus out in the world right now because of your job, this transit will give you a lot of resilience and stick-to-itiveness and perseverance and mental strength and fortitude, which is good. On the other hand, this transit can also be one in which you are feeling a little pent up, Saturn, and a little frustrated, Mars. And so you got to be really careful about not being self-destructive or of not starting to develop a pessimistic attitude. Those are some important things. As the month goes on, you're also going to feel the urge or need to break free, probably from the limits or confines of home and family dynamics, even if that means just going into another room. But Mars in the first wants to be independent, square to Uranus in the fourth from the family, or there's some kind of breakthrough or really dramatic change happening around home and family this month. It's very personal, and it might be something that you have to kind of confront or face. Again, you want to be careful with some degree of, recklessness. Don't be overly zealous or dogmatic or too severe in your thinking, because Mars and Saturn in your first might have you being a little uncompromising. And you may need some greater degree of independence or freedom this month, but just you with the containment of Saturn, things are a little combustible. So just be careful and try to find ways of accessing the freedom that you're looking for that are healthy and that don't create too much chaos that you end up then having to deal with. So the other thing that's happening at the beginning of the month, for the first 15 days of the month, Jupiter and Pluto are conjoining in your 12th house. This is a place that is traditionally associated with kind of the dark night of the soul. The 12th house is a place where it's very inward. It can be very isolated and alone. It can also be about visitation of our shadows or unconscious material. We can learn and grow a lot from what we face in the 12th house. And so this Jupiter-Pluto conjunction in the 12th may have us face some very deep shadows. You do want to be careful of your health. Jupiter-Pluto in the 12th can come as mental, emotional, or physical health crisis. I'm not trying to freak anyone out, but just, again, be careful about being overly intense or rigid or extreme in some ways this month, because you could exhaust yourself. You don't want to wear down your immune system. And that Jupiter-Pluto conjunction in the 12th can indicate a kind of healing crisis. So you do want to be careful. Just take good care of yourself. Be very gentle and easy on yourself this month if you're an Aquarian. It could also mean if you work in a hospital environment that it's really like blowing up. The 12th house is a place of hospitals and prisons and places where people go when they're suffering. Jupiter-Pluto, if you work in that kind of environment, again, don't be surprised if you see some really intense situations this month. I'm sure I'm not saying anything that's really that groundbreaking, but Jupiter-Pluto in that house is pretty intense if you're in healthcare. Now, around the 13th to the 15th of the month, the sun in Aries is going to go through some squares to Jupiter and Pluto. Now, this could have you feeling a little bit more martial mentally. You could start feeling just, again, with Mars in your first house this month, and then the exalted sun and Mercury going through your third house of the mind. That's a lot of fire. That's a lot of Mars. That's a lot of God of War in relation to you, your body, and your mind. Now, when it comes to taking action, being brave and courageous, that's awesome. You could really use that this month. Square to Pluto and Jupiter around the 13th, the 15th, and the 12th. You just want to make sure that you're not getting into reactive, combative, hyper vigilant mode, or that you're not becoming someone that's difficult to live with or that's mentally or verbally domineering. You want to watch out for those themes or qualities in the environment too. Separate yourself from people who are just being really, intense or mean, or if they're on a power trip, separate yourself, get some distance, and don't be the person on the power trip either. um, Now, then the sun goes through a square. This big movement then happens, right? So then the sun is going to, from the sign of Aries, after the squares to Pluto and Jupiter, then it goes through a square to Saturn as it enters the fourth house in Taurus. So you'll see that happen right around the 19th. 19th into the 20th. So then the sun enters the fourth house, squares Saturn in the first. Um, Again, then we see a new moon on the 22nd in your fourth house. Put that there. You can see it right about there. So here's the new moon in Taurus in your fourth house. And again, that new moon square to Saturn in the first. The fourth house is the house of home, family, ancestral karma, family karma, property or living situation. There's something really new taking place there between late April and late May. Maybe a move, maybe some kind of relocation, some shift that's really big that's happening in your family. Could be a little unexpected and dramatic. It could also be about literally a picture of confinement to your home and how it's changing you on a personal level. I know that a lot of people are dealing with not being out in the world on the front lines, but being stuck at home. And for those people, if you're an Aquarius sun or Aquarius rising, this month could very much be about the way in which that home environment is causing you to look at some things within yourself that maybe you've been avoiding or you just haven't had time to look at. It could change you at a very deep level, and also have you looking at how you are the same as or very different from the home base in which you live or come from. So almost like an identity crisis relative to family and roots. That starts taking shape through the end of the month. And Mercury at the very end of the month is going to participate in the exact same dynamic. It goes through the squares to Jupiter and Pluto in the 3rd to the 12th, feeling a little bit more mentally agitated or intense. Then it goes right into Taurus, hits the square from the 4th to the 1st, goes into the conjunction with Uranus by the 30th of the month. Same themes: home, family, revolution in relation to identity and sense of self. Something is happening around your home and family karma and your understanding of who you are, and whether you see yourself as fitting some kind of image maybe from the past, or trying to break free from the past and reestablish some more appropriate understanding of yourself in the world. For example, right now, a lot of people not having work, let's say, a lot of people who don't have work right now, who are at home, are being like, well, who am I? And do I really like what I'm doing? And, oh, I guess I've been doing what I've been doing the last 20 years, or 10 years, or whatever it might be, because of the way I was raised, or because of, the ideas that I took up from my parents and what they did with their life. So that kind of like reflective alchemical cooking pot of the fourth house is really strong toward the end of the month, and it relates back very intimately to core identity issues with Saturn in your first house. So that's what's going on for Aquarians. Let's wind it back and start over again and go through it now for Geminis. So we're going to put Gemini on the ascendant at the start of the month. And we start over with Mercury and Neptune in your 10th house. So the beginning of the month, that Mercury-Neptune energy between the 1st and say the 6th or 7th, really showing up pretty powerfully in your career house. Again, for a lot of people, this is going to mean losing jobs or losing work, or the dissolving of something that you have done for a living. And, Mercury is your home planet. It's in its fall, it's in its detriment in the career house, combining with Neptune, who is the great dissolver. A lot of people, I think a lot of Geminis are going to deal with uh, being impacted in the workplace this month, in facing some kind of sea change and some level of uncertainty professionally. Now, weirdly, for other Gemini risings who have this happening in your career house, there's also going to be a weird way in which your whole sense of self and professional trajectory is going to change, and maybe sort of miraculously. Mercury and Neptune can be about dissolving things, but they can also be about providing a vision, or um, kind of uplifting and inspiring energy that might um, fuel some kind of new creative project. So there is the potential for something, some kind of emotional and mental change of scenery this month that is uplifting and positive. But you also do have to be careful of not getting diluted or going off on chasing fantasies this month around work or career. And also, remember that if you're experiencing some kind of sea change around work right now, and if you're kind of going through a moment of like, wait, who am I? What am I doing? That'd be pretty normal for Geminis this month. Um, it could also be a moment where you have to be, you know, Geminis oftentimes will be good at multiple different things, and so it could be that some very unique and unexpected opportunity to use your skills in a way that's very different than you're used to using them comes up. That's also kind of the miraculous, magical nature of Neptune up there right now. So at the exact same time, Mars and Saturn are conjoining in your ninth house, which is the place at the beginning of the month, the place of religion and higher education. There's certainly it's a very serious energy in that house right now. Mentally, you could be learning a lot right now, or you might be taking more time to study something. At the same time, um, the need to skeptically inquire and to analyze and even criticize or evaluate. Mars is very incisive in the ninth house, like a researcher. And Saturn is very formal and structured and traditional, and sometimes more skeptical, or, so some sacred doubt or some form of investigation or research. Serious thinking going on this month for Geminis, and also maybe feeling prohibited or temporarily stuck or uncertain about some direction that you want to take in the future with regard to travel, or faith in religion, or learning, or going back to school. Some of those things this month is going to ask you to take a really hard, sober look at. Anything involving the higher mind, religion, learning, travel, um, more serious energy there. Asking for a deeper commitment, but also really pausing to make sure you know what you believe, or you know what you want to focus on. But very high-minded. I mean, you can come out of this having thought very deeply and probably come to some really mature choices, but not easy decisions and not easy things to consider with Mars and Saturn in the ninth house this month. Like, for example, you can imagine how, I'm just going to give an example. Like, let's say that a young man is shipped off to, Vietnam, and he gets there and he starts questioning his entire notion of, you know, um, patriotism, right? So he's got to rethink something in a really deep way, and it might be a difficult thing to reflect in a way like that. It's kind of a Mars Saturn in the ninth house kind of feeling, like having to reflect very deeply upon something, and sober up and wisening and maturing energy of the higher mind. So that's all month long, but very prominent the first 7 days or so of the month. Also, the need to the feeling of sort of divine rebellion. Mars will square Uranus on the 7th in the 12th house, and that can be the need to free oneself from some kind of conventions or constraints. And to, if you've had plans, there may be some feeling of needing to break out of the plan. There can be a feeling of needing to break the mold somehow, defying or resisting different traditional teachers or forms of knowledge, or the status quo, just feeling the need mentally to explore something that's outside of the box. That's very probably something that you'll feel pretty intensely as Mars squares Uranus by April 7th. Now, Let's see. So we go forward from there between the 13th and the 15th. Well, actually, we'll go forward to the 7th first. So there's a full moon on the 7th, and that full moon on the 7th is going to land in your 5th house, which is a place of joy, good fortune, children, pregnancy, and creativity. And the ruler Venus is in your 1st house. So that does add a kind of more uplifting, creative energy. Might be the cool breeze of fun and doing something to kind of lighten the mood a little bit. But again, this is kind of creating a bit of a grand air trine scenario with Saturn and Mars in the 9th. So there's questions right now about what brings joy and happiness and where to find love, harmony, and in the midst of that, there's this almost like reevaluating your core belief structures this month if you're a Gemini, and what you really think is true about reality. And there's future planning that you're doing, it looks like, but you have to consider what really brings me happiness, and you'll feel that need to bring in personal happiness into some kind of evaluation process by the full moon on April 7th. Now, uh, from the 13th to the 15th, actually for the first 15 days of the month, we go back to here, Jupiter and Pluto will also be conjoined in your 8th house. That can be very powerful and transformative in relation to other people's money or resources or debts, or you could see some pretty critical transformation happening in relation to finances around that time. It is a deep, heavy moment of death and rebirth for everyone, this Jupiter-Pluto dynamic. But in the 8th house, it's a heavy place for Geminis. So the theme of death and rebirth is amplified in your month ahead by Jupiter and Pluto in the 8th. But there's a lot of, it's like the death card in tarot. You pull the death card in tarot, and very rarely does it mean literal death. So often there's just this theme of almost like abandoning something, a plan or a vision or a hope or a dream, and letting it go, and something else starting to come in. But it might be a little bit painful letting go of something, or even just coming to pay off a debt or an obligation, or fulfilling something that has weighed on you heavily. Even it's kind of funny, like, you ever seen the Shawshank Redemption, that movie? After people get out of prison, sometimes they don't know what to do with themselves, and they almost like prefer to go back into prison. So there is some sense in which a weight's being lifted, but you may not know what to do with yourself in the wake of that. And so there's this serious kind of depressive mood in, like, almost like, what do I do with myself now or next? So that's a constructive place. Stick with it and don't let it get you down. It might take a little while to figure out what's next, and some serious thinking may be involved, but you are heading somewhere. Now, between April 13th to the 15th, we see the sun getting in on a square to Pluto and Jupiter in the 11th house, squaring Pluto, Jupiter in the 8th. It's a need to kind of blaze your own trail here that starts coming in, which is good. That should give you some lift, because it's a little like weightier month, more contemplative, weightier month for Geminis, especially mentally. And this energy from the exalted sun in Aries in the 11th house of friends and groups wants to blaze some kind of new trail, wants to set out on a new adventure, and is doing so in relation to that death and rebirth theme of Pluto Jupiter, especially where some plan or vision of how things were going to be or how things are is kind of, it's being stripped back. And yet the sun in Aries will start to provide you with some inspiration about how to move forward, what kind of people you want to be around, what kind of world you want to live in, and some impetus to start something new. Now, between the 19th and the end of the month, then there's a sequence that goes just like this. You're going to see the sun go through those squares to Jupiter and Pluto, and then just as soon as it does, the sun will enter Taurus. It'll be in your 12th house, and it'll immediately be square to Saturn in your 9th. Then right away, again, you're going to see a new moon in Taurus in the 12th house. Then Mercury in Aries will go through the same dynamic that the sun went through. Mercury will square Jupiter and Pluto, then hit the square to Saturn, and then it will conjoin with Uranus between the 24th and the 30th. So what does that mean? Well, it's like a two-step. We've got planets squaring from the 12th to the 9th and from the 11th to the 8th. Culminating with the new moon in the 12th and the Uranian energy in the 12th house, there's going to be an impulse, two impulses I feel like Geminis are going to deal with this month. In the wake of needing to start over or start something new, or wondering about how to create the next chapter in life, which I think is going to be pretty pronounced, there's going to be two choices: to walk down a path that's more well-trodden. And that's the Saturn in the 9th house that's saying, look, let's be serious, let's be smart, let's commit to something, let's define our commitments and our beliefs. And then Uranus in the 12th, which may want to go off the beaten trail. The hard thing about this is that either could be the wrong choice, depends on the person. The less conservative path, let's say Uranus in the 12th house, could very well be like the need to defy convention. Oh, well, I thought maybe I'd go back to school. Maybe I'm just doing that because I feel like that's the next societally sort of sanctioned step that I should take with my life. Whereas maybe I'm deciding that I want to do something very different and less conventional. Now, for one person, that's going to be the exact right choice. For another person, going to school and doing something that's a little bit more structured is going to be the right choice. It comes down to intentions and whether we're listening to the voice of our conscience, and whether we are even if we take steps that are unconventional, that they're not self-destructive, that they still have the integration of our beliefs, our values, and our commitments behind them, that we're committed to whatever we're doing, even if it is unconventional, that we're willing to take responsibility for the choices that we make if they're unconventional. On the other hand, the conventional energy of Saturn pulls back in the other direction and says, look, maybe you have a pattern of just not being able to hunker down and focus and commit to things, and that the best way for you to learn right now is going to be to do that. And so don't run from that. So I think those are the two extremes that Geminis are dealing with toward the very end of the month. I see it as a very psychological time. So that's what I've got for you, air signs, this month. Let me know how it goes. Like I said, I think this has been my hardest month of ever having to do horoscopes, because I feel like there's two people that I'm seeing and corresponding with, people who are out there whose lives haven't stopped, who have to keep working, and oftentimes in places that where there's danger, and it's like it can be very traumatizing. Then you have people who are at home in a more confined space. It's two very different worlds. So I'd really love to hear from you guys and hear how these things are going. Admittedly, I had a hard time articulating myself this month with all of my horoscopes. I apologize, and promise that I will keep doing my best to unpack all of the transits of the month as well as we go along. And I'm going to learn a lot from this month, and I'm sure we all will. Okay, well, I look forward to catching up with you again for horoscopes in May. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.